Welcome back to GeoCrisis Update, your trusted source for detailed analysis of global conflicts and geopolitical developments. In today's episode, we are going to take an in-depth look at one of the most significant and ultimately controversial agreements in modern history, the Budapest Memorandum. This agreement, signed in 1994, led to Ukraine surrendering its nearly 2,000 nuclear warheads in exchange for security assurances from major global powers. Promises that, as we now know, were tragically broken. To fully understand how this agreement has played such a pivotal role in the current war between Russia and Ukraine, we need to rewind to the early 1990s, a time when the global order was undergoing dramatic shift. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 triggered seismic changes across the world, particularly in the newly independent states that emerged from the disintegration of the USSR. Ukraine was one such state, and with its independence came a massive inheritance, a gigantic arsenal of conventional and nuclear weapons. At the time, Ukraine found itself in possession of the third-largest nuclear stockpile in the world, right behind the United States and Russia. It is estimated that the country had around 1,900 nuclear warheads, a quantity that made it a major player in the global nuclear landscape. Along with the warheads, Ukraine also inherited the necessary launch systems and delivery vehicles, which included intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and long-range bombers capable of deploying these nuclear weapons. This arsenal not only provided Ukraine with immense strategic leverage, but also placed it at the center of post-Cold War nuclear disarmament talk. However, the early 1990s were marked by intense international pressure to reduce the proliferation of nuclear weapons, particularly among newly independent states like Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, all of which had inherited nuclear weapons from the former Soviet Union. The idea of these fledgling states maintaining their own nuclear arsenals was a major concern for the global community, particularly for Western powers that were keen to prevent the further spread of nuclear capabilities. Amid this backdrop, the Budapest Memorandum was negotiated and signed in 1994. Ukraine, under the leadership of President Leonid Kuchma, agreed to relinquish its nuclear arsenal and transfer all of its warheads to Russia, where they would be dismantled. In return, Ukraine was given assurances by the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia that its sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity would be respected. These assurances were meant to provide Ukraine with the security it needed to feel confident in giving up such a powerful deterrent. It's important to note that these assurances, while politically significant, were not legally binding like a formal treaty. They were essentially promises, backed by the political goodwill of the signatories. At the time, this seemed like a reasonable trade. Ukraine would give up its nuclear weapons in exchange for financial aid and guarantees of protection from the world's most powerful nations. China and France also provided similar assurances, though they did not sign the actual document. For Ukraine, the Budapest Memorandum appeared to be a path to greater integration into the international community, particularly with the West. In the post-Cold War era, there was optimism about the prospects for peace and stability in Europe. The idea of Russia ever threatening Ukraine's sovereignty seemed distant, and the hope was that by abandoning its nuclear arsenal, Ukraine could pave the way for stronger diplomatic ties and economic support from Western countries. But as history would later show, this agreement had critical flaws. The most glaring issue was the fact that the assurances provided to Ukraine were not backed by any real enforcement mechanisms. In essence, if one of the signatories violated the terms of the agreement, there were no automatic penalties or obligations for the other signatories to take specific action. Fast forward to 2014, when Russia invaded and annexed Crimea, an internationally recognized part of Ukraine. This was the first major test of the Budapest Memorandum, and it was a test that the global community failed. Russia's annexation of Crimea was a blatant violation of the promises it had made to Ukraine in 1994, and yet the response from the other signatories, the US and UK, was alarmingly weak. The world watched in shock as Russian forces moved into Crimea with relative ease. Despite the violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity, the West's reaction was limited to economic sanctions and symbolic gestures of support. The United States and the United Kingdom imposed financial penalties on Russian entities and individuals, and they began providing Ukraine with limited military aid, including non-lethal support like troop training and defensive weapons. However, what was notably absent from the international response was any form of direct military intervention. The fear of escalating into a broader conflict with Russia, a nuclear power, led to a policy of restraint. While the sanctions were significant, they were not enough to reverse the annexation of Crimea or deter Russia from further aggressive actions. This muted response sent a dangerous message to Russian President Vladimir Putin. The West was unwilling to take meaningful steps to stop his expansionist ambitions. Many analysts believe that it was this tepid response to the Crimea crisis that emboldened Putin to take the next step in his broader strategy of territorial expansion. In 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, an act that shocked the world and marked the final nail in the coffin for the Budapest Memorandum. Ukraine's sovereignty was once again violated, and this time, the scale of the conflict was far greater. The Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 exposed the fundamental weakness of the Budapest Memorandum, namely that political assurances without concrete enforcement mechanisms are essentially worthless in the face of aggression. Ukraine, having given up its nuclear arsenal in exchange for these broken promises, found itself fighting one of the world's most powerful military forces without the strategic deterrence it once had. So, what are the broader implications of the Budapest Memorandum's failure? First and foremost, it raises serious questions about the future of nuclear non-proliferation effort. The memorandum was once seen as a model for encouraging countries to give up their nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees. However, the collapse of these guarantees in Ukraine sends a dangerous message to other countries considering nuclear disarmament. If Ukraine, which trusted the assurances of the world's most powerful nations, was left vulnerable to invasion, what hope is there for other states? Countries like North Korea and Iran, which have long been pursuing nuclear programs, may now feel even more determined to maintain or accelerate their efforts. After all, the case of Ukraine demonstrates the potential consequences of giving up nuclear weapons without ironclad guarantees of protection. This could lead to a dangerous escalation in nuclear proliferation, as nations begin to question whether they can truly rely on international agreements to safeguard their security. Moreover, the failure of the Budapest Memorandum could spark a new arms race in regions like East Asia, where countries such as Japan and South Korea live under the constant threat of nuclear-armed neighbors like China and North Korea. In fact, figures like former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe have already suggested that Japan should reconsider its long-standing opposition to nuclear weapons, and South Korean leaders have made similar statements in recent years. There have even been debates within Ukraine about whether the country should reconsider its non-nuclear status. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has used this issue rhetorically to pressure Western nations, suggesting that if Ukraine had maintained its nuclear arsenal, its fate might have been different. Although Zelensky has repeatedly denied that Ukraine is actively pursuing nuclear weapons, the country's technical capacity to do so remains a lingering concern. While it is unlikely that Ukraine will develop nuclear weapons in the near future, the possibility cannot be entirely ruled out, especially given the immense strain the ongoing war has placed on the country. Ukraine still possesses significant expertise and infrastructure inherited from the Soviet Union, including advanced missile and drone technology that could, in theory, be adapted for nuclear purposes. The collapse of the Budapest Memorandum and the ongoing war in Ukraine also have profound implications for the international community's approach to security guarantees. If political assurances can be so easily disregarded, what does that mean for the future of global diplomacy? Can nations truly trust international agreements if there is no clear enforcement mechanism to back them up? These are questions that the global community must grapple with as it faces the potential for increased nuclear proliferation and a more unstable international order. The failure of the Budapest Memorandum may very well mark the beginning of a new era, one in which countries feel that they must rely on their own military capabilities, including nuclear weapons, to ensure their survival. In the end, the lessons from the Budapest Memorandum are stark and unsettling. Ukraine's decision to give up its nuclear weapons in exchange for political assurances may have seemed like a wise choice in 1994, but the events of the past decade have shown just how fragile those assurances can be. The international community now faces a critical challenge: how to prevent future conflicts like the one in Ukraine and how to restore trust in the agreements meant to keep the world safe. Thanks for watching GeoCrisis Update. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you can stay informed on the latest developments in global conflicts and geopolitics. As always, stay aware, stay informed, and we'll see you next time.